Hello, everybody. I thank you for making your way through the rain and bad weather to come over here. My name is Jim Turk. I'm the director of the Center for Free Expression, which is sponsoring today's talk. And I'm really delighted with who we're all going to hear speak in a minute. Len Findlay is somebody I've known for some, 15 years, something of that sort. Is quite a remarkable individual, as you'll soon hear. He's a distinguished university professor in the Department of English at the University of Saskatchewan. He's director of the Humanities Research Unit, and he's a founding member of the Indigenous Humanities Group at the university. Len has always been a strong activist, outspoken, progressive, and I was amazed when he was admitted to the Royal Society of Canada, because that organization has a reputation amongst those of us who are critical of it as being a group of extinct volcanoes, that is, formerly eminent people who... so for somebody really progressive to get in is unusual. What was even more unusual, he was elected president of Academy 1 of the Royal Society, which is the part of the Royal Society for people in the humanities. And so somehow this really progressive activist was also able to be elected president of the humanities section of the Royal Society. And he was a two-term chair of the Canadian Association of University Teachers Academic Freedom and Tenure Committee. Amongst other things, his edition of the Communist Manifesto was published in 2004. He's co-edited 5 collections of essays, and written chapters on issues ranging from intellectual history and cultural theory to the Indigenous settler interface in Canada historically and currently. And he's working now on the distinctiveness and endangerment of the humanities and on connections between academic freedom and Canadian politics. So I'm really pleased to present Len. He's going to speak to you, and then afterwards there'll be time for discussion and questions. So thank you for coming, Len.
Thank you, Jim. And thank you for coming on this inglorious day that's unfolding still.
I'll do that and get right on to Len.
Thank you. So, self-situation for this talk. I come at this topic as an engaged Canadian, a humanist with no special expertise in psychology or psychiatry or media studies or the internet. I come at it also as someone who responded to the bleak years of the Harper government and the rise of the ugly Canadian by engaging critically with notions of nationhood, humanity, labour, and the economy. I come at it then with humility and political resolve, and the sense that my struggle for understanding and policy change has been shared by many others, some of whom may be able and willing to help me out today with my version of this struggle. So here's a brief overview. I'll give a very brief history of communication. I'll talk about making meaning and creating awareness. I'll talk about tackling unawareness, the media's political, affective, and optical unconscious, the triple unconscious, as we'll see. I'll then talk about that image of Alan Kurdi and apply the notions of the triple unconscious to that image and its reception and interpretation in the identification of economies of empathy. I'll talk very briefly about Paris, first world economies, and the economies of empathy in that case, and then conclude with a couple of reflections about what it might take for justice to go viral. And my answer to that is a call to action, as in the TRC call to action, and the move from a scarcity economy to an abundance economy. So, a history of communication in 2 examples. The first comes from Marathon in ancient Greece, 490 BC. A runner is assigned to run home to Athens with news of the outcome of the battle. According to legend, he is an accomplished hemerodrome. He runs every day. who delivers the news of victory by mouth to the city's archons and then drops dead. Obviously in play are the speed and stamina of the courier, joined with the reliability of an eyewitness authorized to announce victory over a dreaded enemy, the Persians, ingredients clearly making for a great story, fabricated or not. Some lessons from the story of Marathon. Speed is of the essence, then and now, and Pheidippides did not wait for written confirmation, lest he be scooped or thwarted. The tongue is faster than the text, if less reliable. Physical distance remained a major obstacle to communication until the mid-19th century. And some news stories are even bigger than they seem at the time, with Marathon now seen as marking the beginning of classical Greek culture's most productive 2 centuries. The message was more important than the messenger, but his feat is, of course, now an event in the modern Olympics and a loose synonym for any experience demanding special endurance. Finishing a term paper the night before it's due is a form of the marathon that I'm sure you're well aware of. Considerations of time, space, and technology help determine whether a story goes viral or becomes canonical or simply disappears or is made to disappear. Influential, too, is the nature of the story itself. But is it true that bad news travels fast? And what does that tell us about human receptivity? This notion of my second example and preparing from it, first one from ancient Greece and lessons to be gleaned from messaging then. My second example is from the early modern period in Europe, at a time when the whole idea of stories, the reliability or unreliability, were everywhere in the culture. Here, for example, is rumor leading, in the 1580s, leading the figure of Mars, and rumor has a trumpet to amplify the message and is covered in tongues. So that the iconography of this print points to the fact that the issues I'm exploring, primarily in a textual sense, are there across the whole cultural landscape. Here's another from the time of Fama, the goddess of fame again, with Historia together. And notice that they are, in a sense, monopolizing the technologies of messaging. There are no newspapers in the 1580s. There hasn't been the urbanization that brings the bourgeoisie in numbers into the city and creates the conditions for an audience and for the circulation of a more popular print cultural form. But so lots of this stuff going on. But my actual example comes from Shakespeare. And it's from an unquiet time, and I want us to think about the relationship between messaging and the political context. Is it turbulent? Is it not? Is it harmonious? Is it acrimonious? So this is an unquiet time in early modern England, with the incurable doubling of fame as infamy, honor as notoriety, enacting the endless instability of authority and truth. We have, for example, and my example comes from Shakespeare's Henry IV, Part 2, with a very famous stage direction. Enter a rumor, painted full of tongues, just as in the first of the engravings that I show. So before we get to that, to be clear about the issues, rumor, fame, and scandal are the precursors of celebrity, virality, and spin, weapons of mass destruction, etc. They play in different media, emphasizing sometimes the human eye, as in witnessing, sometimes the human ear, the receptivity of the audience, or the person who receives a story, or the tongue when it's focused on the utterer. And that these emphases depend on medium and context within the politics of the human sensorium. The senses that we use, the hierarchies among the senses that we understand, are intimately connected to political issues, as I'll endeavor to show. So here's the passage that comes from the induction after the famous stage direction, Enter Rumour, painted full of tanks. Rumour is bringing false news of the Battle of Shrewsbury. Open your ears. For which of you will stop the vent of hearing when loud rumour speaks? I, from the Orient to the drooping West, making the wind my post-horse, still unfold the act commenced on this ball of earth. Upon my tongue continual slanders ride, the which in every language I pronounce, stuffing the ears of men with false reports. I speak of peace, while covert enmity under the smile of safety wounds the world. And who but rumour? Who but only I make fearful musters and prepare defence, while the big year, swoln with some other grief, is thought with child by the stern tyrant war, and no such matter. Rumour is a pipe blown by surmises, jealousies, conjectures, and up so easy and so plain a stop that the blunt monster with uncounted heads, the still discordant, wavering multitude, can play upon it. But what a need I thus my well-known body to anatomize among my household? More lessons here, lessons for today. Rumour's amenable sovereignty, its user-friendliness. You can pick up the story and pass the rumour on. You can even adjust it to your own convenience and inclination. Rumour's user-friendliness means stories can take on a life of their own, of distributed and refractive as well as reflexive force, though within a larger communication system. Rumour's World Wide Web knows no geopolitical or linguistic barriers in either its open or its covert operation. It knows instead the fog of war as the ripest, indeed Rumsfeldian occasion for rumour to distort the truth. And its anti-democratic disdain is there in the gullible hydra populace, lending substance and impact to continuous slanders while free to play within her rules. Rumour is an allegorical figure, like the market, an abstraction from actual, fallible people who originate, circulate, validate, or falsify the news. The remoteness of allegory, like the market, goes from the global to the local, from the world to the household in this passage, and the theatre, from the noble to the humble, insisting that nothing that we do, from the most intimate to the most public communication, is safe from taint and safe from bad virality. Communication, like the market, proves a contradictory formation, all-powerful on the one hand, yet responsive to the individual speculator's wish to profit from fear or envy, war or peace. It is hence a site of acute responsibility and self-exposure for source, medium, and market. Shakespeare is writing at a time when a relatively new communications technology, printing, was making inroads into the role and legitimacy of speech, especially Aboriginal and underclass speech, but only to a point, i.e., orality retains extraordinary powers to mobilize, inform, alarm, and deceive. But no technology, no platform, new or old, fully determines the nature and outcomes of human exchange. And I think techno-triumphalists who who think the web will save us and the world should pay attention to my challenge there. The medium is never the entire message. Massive media ownership is not omnipotence, but only a very real danger. So turning from my two examples to thinking about a little more discursively and more contemporarily, about how we think about communication in the media. Where does it happen? What does it do? Well, there are various versions of this. The philosopher John Locke sees public opinion as the third domain in society, along with the edicts of the laws, temporal and spiritual. And he talked about public opinion at a time of an emergent public sphere, in which would be the audience that would consume media in the early modern period. And so his idea of public opinion was refined via urbanization and its bourgeois public sphere towards what are now called social license and Aboriginal license in Canada today. What's the public feel about this? Think of the role of pollsters. Think of the immense authority that is ascribed to public opinion on various issues. Well, there's a particular history there, and it's a very important one. And when we talk about the media, when we talk about finding out things, we can hear them on the grapevine. Well, where does that grapevine come from? There aren't many grapevines growing in Saskatchewan, I can tell you, so it's obviously not the natural one. It's very interesting that in terms of the notion of the grapevine, it emerges during the American Civil War. So once again, we have social turbulence, we have war, we have instability, and then the pressures that are put on communication. Is it true? Is it false? Did we win? Did we lose? Is X dead? Is X alive? Or merely wounded? So the notion of comes from arguably one of two origins. Either it was telegraph wires during the Civil War, so hearing it on the grapevine was hearing it through and the wires looking like vines on a tree. Or there was a tavern in New York called the Grapevine, so people could have been snooping in the old way. So you've got the new technology of the telegraph is offering one explanation, and the oral one, the old word of mouth and eavesdropping on the other. And the interplay between the two, I think, is emblematic of the mediascape and its particular configuration at any one point. If you think of the vocabulary that we use when we talk about stories, the word trend was a word very much in evidence in sociology and social analysis. When you move to something as being trendy, you're moving from sociology and analysis towards the vagaries and fickleness of fashion. Oh, that's very trendy. When does the next trend leave, kind of thing. But when you get trendy, but when you get trending, you know, and the BBC has BBC trending, I mean, what is the world coming to? Trending seems to be referring inside an informational medium to a particular set of operations that suggests that you should be liking this or disliking it, entering into it, becoming part of some kind of discursive community. So looking at the language that we employ to think about information is very important. And social media obviously brings, so I'm not underplaying the role of technology, the particular medium. And of course, social media has brought about the redistribution of authorship. Everybody's an author now. And that can be a good thing or it can be a bad thing. It's not an entirely glorious thing, as we'll see. And then there's the expression going viral, which I'm going to pay a little more attention to. Viral goes from communicable disease to an invasive computer ailment, there's a virus in my machine, to an index of importance. Well, how do we get there? Well, a place to start, and a practice I would urge upon you, is to apply political philology to the vocabulary that you employ in thinking about the media and doing your work on the media. What language are you using, and what accountability comes with the language that you use? Political philology is a good place to start. And the term viral, like the term revolution, undergoes, from disease onwards, undergoes a sudden, radical, arguably radicalizing shift in its meaning. Revolution in the late 18th century turns its meaning upside down. Up until this point, it was an orderly orbit, repeating itself perennially and celestially. And then suddenly, it becomes the very opposite. It becomes the rupture of hitherto orderly social patterns, daily and politically. So my question in putting the viral alongside the revolutionary is, viral goes from a negative epidemic to a somehow positive, enviable communicative impact. How does it get there, and how important is that change? Does this signify, in the notion of the viral that we're going to be looking at, does this signify another seismic political shift, like in 1789, or rather the expansion of circuses to offset the scarcity of bread? I use bread and circuses there, the idea of distraction. Is things going viral? Is that the illusion of agency? Is that the illusion of change? Or is it real impact, real change, real transformation? Virality then is, before we ask whose pain goes viral, staying with this notion of virality a little longer, there are possibilities of cognitive imperialism, Marie Baptiste, my colleague's term. You get viral marketing. These raise questions of agency and co-optation throughout the shift from processing to interpretation and liking, sharing, tweeting, retweeting, etc. Empowerment imperiled by commodification. Back to the market that I'm going to bring through the notion of the economy into, I think, clear focus, I hope, in a little while. The eager or reluctant moment of recognition and identification takes us to the cultural, aesthetic, and political challenges of finding or creating an audience that is not merely, not even remotely, a market, but rather an emergent social movement. Can going viral mean social change is coming, social change of a progressive and desirable sort? Well, maybe history can help us once again. So I'm going to go back in time, then into the present, back in time 2 more times, and then we'll come to the present. So let's use another example. This is an example from Karl Marx, who was a very experienced journalist, knew all about the media, wrote extensive journalism throughout his life. And Marx is writing just after the Crimean War, in which messaging had once again been an extraordinary instrument for the state, but also for those who didn't share the state's view of that particular war. Here's Marx over the next 2 slides. Is the view of nature and social relations on which the Greek imagination and hence Greek mythology is based possible with the self-acting mule spindles and railways and locomotives and electric telegraphs? What chance has Vulcan against Roberts and Company? They made locomotives. Jupiter against the lightning rod, and Hermes against the Crédit Mobilier. All mythology overcomes and dominates and shapes the forces of nature in the imagination and by the imagination. It therefore vanishes with the real mastery over them. What becomes of Fama alongside Printing House Square? Is Achilles possible with powder and lead? Or the Iliad with the printing press, not to mention the printing machine? Do not the song and the saga and the muse necessarily come to an end with the printer's bar? Hence, do not the necessary conditions of epic poetry vanish? Let's go into the passage a little more, looking at Marx, at media, and the notion of mediations. Marx connects media to larger forces of modern production that reveal the power of the gods, overtaken and overshadowed by human ingenuity and fast capital. Hermes, in the passage, the swiftest messenger of Greek myth and a close affiliate of Thebes, lags far behind the mobility and thievery of international credit in the mid-19th century. The Crédit Mobilier was involved in all sorts of scams, railways, mines, flips of various sorts. And so Marx is saying, Hermes has no chance. So Marx has a strong sense of technological struggle and its socio-cultural consequences. It's that coupling of both that I would like to recommend. New means of production and their enabling social relations change even what can be believed and imagined, mythically and poetically, en route to current market fundamentalism in search of the ultimate algorithm. Fama gets her comeuppance here. The goddess Fama beside Printing House Square. Printing House Square, a reference to the city of London, the heart of empire, in a square that got its name from where the king's printer had been and where the Times, imperialist organ, also known as the Thunderer, the Times now defines and disseminates the news. The printing presses of the Times are state-of-the-art, and the recent telegraph dispatches from the Crimea on that particular grapevine have made its most famous journalist, William Howard Russell, the first war correspondent ever. And this without his dropping dead from exhaustion while delivering his message as a marathon. And there is the home of the Times, Printing House Square. Notice in this illustration that class separates the newsboy, who you see in the foreground with the papers, the broadsheets, and the printers who one doesn't see, from the Victorian gentleman in a setting that could double as an academic quadrangle. I'll come back to that a little later. So that's the Printing House Square that's supposed to rule the world through ruling the messaging by which the world informs itself. And what lies behind this is what I call the cunning of production, not the sovereignty of consumption. Technology, including information technology and its owners, are a transformative force, but not the only one. The Times was the first newspaper to bear that name, but its rivals in other metropoles and power centers were soon adopting that name too. But my point, political resistance is at least as important as commercial emulation in understanding virality in history and as history. So the Thunderers, this famous newspaper's technological edge, itself depended on its labor force's understanding of that technology. And that force was literate, organized, and radical. The British establishment's unionized political unconscious, one of the three versions of the unconscious we'll take further. In the political unconscious comes from Frederick Jameson's book of that title in 1981. The subtitle is Narrative as a Socially Symbolic Act, and it's an attempt to emphasize the social dimensions and the social uses of all messaging, so returning them to a kind of accountability. He says the political unconscious finds its function and necessity in restoring to the surface of the text the represented embodied reality of this fundamental history of struggle, of class struggle in particular. And the idea is, here's the story, what's the subtext? Whose story never gets told or only gets told in distorted or disfigured forms? The notion of the political unconscious exposes a mechanism of mystification serving bourgeois production. The Thunderer's editorial class allegiance occasions rumblings of another sort from the shop floor that match its own viral power in 1848 and after. So that the story of labour is also to be told alongside the story of commercial success and media penetration, media presence. But in this passage, Marx is aware of another unconscious too. And this is how the introduction to the Grundrisse, this is the final paragraph of the introduction. A man cannot become a child again, or he becomes childish. But does he not find joy in the child's naivety? And must he himself not strive to reproduce its truth at a higher stage? Does not the true character of each epoch, and remember that photographs we're coming to, does not the true character of each epoch come alive in the nature of its children? Why should not the historic childhood of humanity, its most beautiful unfolding, as a stage never to return, exercise an eternal charm? What we have is the second form of the unconscious we'll be dealing with, the affective unconscious. Marx employs here a further series of questions, these markedly rhetorical like his others, to highlight the differences and continuities between infancy and maturity. In the fact of the non-coincidence, he also locates the non-coincidence of materially determined social conditions and cultural production. Capitalist modernity may win out in the short term, corruptly, hermetically, but naivety endures as a bridge to an intergenerational compact, and that deeply affecting question. Marx's methodological introduction to Grundrisse, his critique of the foundations of political economy, ends with questions such as this one, posed bluntly, and he poses it in the heyday of child labour and of vampire capital. Does not the true character of each epoch come alive in the nature of its children? Jean Piaget's point about the affective unconscious being available mainly as strong negatives or strong positives is anticipated here as Marx refuses industrialization as social progress, requiring the commodification of childhood by the Manchester School and the capitalizing of children's blood, that's his image, in the rapidly developing United States. So today, taking that passage, one might say, what is Printing House Square alongside Tahrir or Syntagma Square in Cairo or in Athens? There's been a resurgence of the agora as a place of gathering in recent times, even with mobile phones, even with the web, even with various forms of communication. Well, I'm not going to try and emulate Kanye West. I know my own limitations. But he says, now we all ain't going to be American Idols. We can at least grab a camera and shoot a viral. Grab a camera and shoot a viral. Take the power in your own hands. His version is that this is all about self-empowerment. I want to put some caveats alongside there. Marx has two versions of the unconscious, the political unconscious and the affective unconscious brought through the image of the child. They need another one so that we can better contend with viral images and nouns, not only instagrammatically, but grammatically in the old sense, as indices of empowerment. And is there a politics that comes with that empowerment, with those new technologies, that new capacity to communicate? And what is that other unconscious? The other, in my third version of the unconscious, is the optical unconscious linked to the invention of photography and its investigation. The optical unconscious comes from Walter Benjamin, a member of the Frankfurt School, great writer on the work of art in the age of its mechanical reproduction, and so on. And his brief history of photography, he brings in this idea that the photographic image has an optical unconscious. In the tradition of Marx and wrestling with the power of photography rather than newsprint, Benjamin coins his typically tantalizing phrase, das optische Unbewusste, to mark a limit and animate a surplus. To mark a limit and animate a surplus. To mark a limit to the scene and animate a surplus of the apparently unseeable as unseen, or seen but denied, obscured, disfigured, cropped, shopped, or repressed. Digital photography, no differently than traditional photography, accessed, shared, modified online, does not dispel this uncanniness through hypersignification, the showing of the communicative codes, as well as the product, and mimesis. Mimesis is a new word to me. Mimesis I knew as the Greek word for imitation, but mimesis comes from meme, of course, in which memes circulate at the hands and whims of many, blurring the distinction between production and consumption. But my point is that these new technologies, these new concepts, these new practices have their social and cultural logics too. The wonderful essay on this in the Journal of Visual Culture by Elmore Schiffman in 2014. And so they have the irrespective of the form, there are connections to the optical, the affective, and the political unconscious. Crudely put, the camera can bear witness, the digital camera no less than the traditional camera, can bear witness, but it is also made to lie all the time. And the lies it purveys, under the cover of objectivity or creative alteration, are mostly the lies of capital and its fellow furies, colonialism and racism. That's what this is connected to, the marketing of the alibis of the dominant. I moved very quickly past that particular photograph out of respect. So we have that photograph and the primary affect of that little boy on the beach. Pity and sadness and an innocent young life ended in a way that encapsulates and somehow clarifies, in the name of the human, the massive migrations and logistical nightmares of crisis in the Levant. The affective unconscious is at work here in ways typically described as follows. The historian David Brinkley from Rice University talks on CNN all the time. Not that I'm urging you to watch CNN, but you know what I mean. Here's Brinkley. Once in a while, an image breaks through the noisy, cluttered global culture and hits people in the heart, not the head. That's one account of this, the effectiveness of this image. Here is Ken Burns, the documentary filmmaker. The power of the single image to convey complex information is still there. It has the power to shock and arrest us, to make us stop for a second and interrupt the flow. Neither Brinkley nor Burns gets or is allowed perhaps by the editor of this piece for the Wall Street Journal, gets beyond the iconic affective moment. The historian says once in a while, which sounds alarmingly imprecise, and then talks about the noise and the clutter. Burns' ongoing and often memorable allegiance to archival and current photos gestures towards complex information and an otherwise engulfing flow that remains unspecified. My point is about the inadequacy of these comments on that particular image. Brinkley attributes agency to the image itself and stresses its impact on is powerful because emotional. Burns plays off a normative notion of information overload, the flow, ignoring, for example, those other global flows, of poison and prosperity, weapons and profits, oil and people. That is to say, theirs are depoliticizing accounts of that image. But the mediascape is not a place to transcend history and geography and politics, but just another venue for these three, insisting on the accountability that must attend information and awareness of that information. So, the Wall Street Journal's frame. Karen Miller Pensiero, on September 11th, 2015, no less, in the piece, cites Brinkley and Burns in her piece in the Wall Street Journal, Elan Kurdi and Photographs That Change History. But the moment and its primary affect are but feebly connected by her to the actual exercise of American military, economic, and diplomatic power in the region, historically and currently. Depression, war, and wonder are invoked through iconic images with apparently transformative power, but the policies and practices of actually existing petro-imperialism, eminently readable, I would say, within the Kurdi frame, remain largely moot in the pages of the United States' largest newspaper by circulation. So, trying to do a better job than I think Brinkley and Burns do, the triple unconscious of this haunting image. The recurrent descriptor across a wide range of media that I've checked of the photograph is that it is haunting. What kind of spectrality is involved in this? It implies, the haunting implies an unconscious, both tenacious and unnerving, within and beyond the primary affect of empathy. Optically, there is an uncanny connection to the unknown antecedents and known companion images for this photo. For the two men fishing imperturbably nearby where that little boy was drowned. And to the Turkish policeman who has to deal with this situation, getting beyond the primary affect. Politically, the figure and ground cry out for location in political geography and political history so as to refuse the generic human, generic nature in the notion of human interest. Back to, so the retrieving and the reasserting of the political unconscious in a case like this, an image that goes viral. If it goes viral without its politics, it will not do the work it otherwise could accomplish. So what we have here are the new Argonauts of the Aegean, as flotsam and jetsam. You know, you expect to see not a human body on the shore, but debris coming through a tsunami or whatever. But to see that human figure on the shore makes it seem like flotsam and jetsam. Interestingly, flotsam and jetsam, when things were the result of shipwrecks and landed on the shore, political authority, the monarch in the case of Britain, could claim what came ashore. Who is owning that body on in that place at that time? And we may also recall the slave ship and the dumping of human cargo in the Middle Passage in the Black Atlantic, and its echo here in the Aegean. This is a civilized shore. It comes from Halicarnassus, home of the first mausoleum, one of the seven wonders of the ancient world, and of Dionysus, a superb rhetorician, to Bodrome, which is the town beside where Alan Kudry was found. Was petroleum long before the petroeconomy. So this whole region has a massive layering of civilizations in it. So to take just the picture of the boy, feel deeply for his predicament, the fate of his family, its connection to Canada and so on, and stop there, is to evacuate history and geography and politics and ethics more powerfully from the image than should ever be done. And the place this is Turkey. Syria is next door. This whole region, which in 1919 was remade, reconfigured. Saudi Arabia was created and so on. There is a political history to this geography that brings back all the bungling, all the damage done by these imperial presences in taking the Levant, taking the Middle East, and reconfiguring it according to their own inclinations. Who's a refugee? Why should we feel for him or her or them? And is feeling enough? Becomes a version of the question. Well, let's go back into history, and it's the last time, with Adam Smith. I've talked about Karl Marx. It seems only fair I should mention Adam Smith, and I will, father. Turning to Smith from Marx, one finds that sympathy, which doubles really as empathy. The word empathy didn't enter the English language until the early 20th century, and it came from German Einfühlung. But before that, sympathy did much of the work that the word empathy now does. And sympathy was a very important term for Adam Smith. What is sympathy? He defines it as changing places in fancy with the sufferer. Smith, building on David Hume, stresses the communicability of affect, while stressing also fellow feeling as the social glue that binds a society of ethical, prudent, propertied gentlemen together. Smith does not want to change places with the sufferer in fact, but only in fancy, a term anchored in aesthetic taste, social sensibility, and the economic interplay of distance and proximity. Think of unfair trade. Think of the coffee in your cup is close to you. The conditions of its production may happen very far away. How do these two things pull together? Smith approaches empathy. He says, it is imagination only that gets us where we enter, as it were, into the sufferer's body and become in some measure the same person with him, and thence form some idea of his sensations and even feel something which, though weaker in degree, is not altogether unlike them. This is from the theory of moral sentiments, just before The Wealth of Nations. Smith's circumspect language preserves the otherness of the living victim of suffering, while that otherness is emphasized by fear of the rude vulgar and their ungovernable passions, disciplined in the past on the private rack, and still now by the public road. He's talking, this is the opening of his book, it's all about sympathy, and it's full of violence. It's full of torture, it's full of public executions, it's full of fear of democratic politics. So that Smith, who is going to articulate the language of capitalism, the argument for the free market, Smith, who will do this, talks about sympathy, and his political fear is at the heart of his notion of sympathy and emotion and affect. So what I'm arguing is there is a capitalist economy of empathy. There is more than one economy of empathy, and one of them is a capitalist economy of empathy. Smith needs a scarcity model of refined sympathy, not a universalist one, because, as he says, with some alarm or disappointment, really, the greatest ruffian, the most hardened violator of the laws of society, is not altogether without instinctual pity. No, if everybody has it, it can't be worth anything. It has to be rare. It has to be scarce. Slowly, sympathy becomes something aroused by the deserving victim in the attentive spectator, as he puts it, the discriminating observer who will not waste it in a double impropriety, both moral and political. Smith moderates and complicates selfishness only in line with the needs of a stable commercial society and its amiable and respectable virtues. So ethics is in cahoots with, in bed with, subordinate to money and the economy. Ai Weiwei. We enter, as it were, the body of the sufferer. That was Smith's claim. This particular entry into the body of the sufferer, simulating Alan Kudry, is staged on Lesbos with a crew coming in specially from Delhi for India Today for the shoot. To acquire an image for an art show whose visitors then shot and shared the image on their smartphones, ensuring it went viral. It went viral. Ai Weiwei stopped tweeting in 2013, but he's still as media savvy as ever. But what is Ai Weiwei doing? Is this the incarnation of empathy, or opportunistic planking, or both, or something else? This simulation orientalizes the discourse around refugee, immigrant, terrorist, but what kind of orientalizing is being done? The photo reclaims from social media and occupies an empathic document as political art, while suggestively moving itself from color to black and white. It literally embodies the solidarity of an adult with a posthumously iconic child, replacing innocent at risk from all directions with something else. But what? It's been enormously controversial, this particular image. Done in Lesbos, not Kos, where the Kudry family was heading, and using celebrity to attract attention to human rights issues. Was the tragedy rare and unrepeatable? Where do the non-intrusive gaze and intimations of the sacred respect for that image intersect? What of the brazen callousness of global right-wing commentary in the original? His father was a human trafficker, that the family were not deserving, there were economic migrants heading for the good life somewhere else. This image, the original image of the child and Ai Weiwei have two kinds of analogous virality within which are played out all of the versions of the economy of empathy that one could probably bring to the case. What of the reluctance to politicize the death of this child beyond personal empathy and blame? Well, you can contrast it with other forms of virality. One of the archives I have is of media coverage of the two occurrences of terrorism leading to considerable loss of human life in Paris. Charlie Hebdo, in which there's a targeting of the Fourth Estate and its freedoms, occasioned viral empathy such that Smith's fancy might have allowed himself to claim "Je suis Charlie." And it is Mukal Devishand of the BBC says that it's "Je suis Charlie," perhaps the biggest hashtag of solidarity in history. There's virality for you. The November attacks, there again, the mediascape is extraordinarily informative. The wounded secular republic, talk of civilization, not Brussels talk, not Gaza talk, that Paris and the predicament of Paris resonates as an iconic loss, as a bellwether for the whole world. So whose pain matters and whose goes viral? This brings me back to my question. Canada's big what if, as I try to answer this question. What if the Kudry affair, with its serious consequences for our sitting government, had happened after the federal election and not before? What if the Paris attacks had occurred in the run-up to the federal election in October and not before? What would our supine mainstream media, even in this building I hold to my terms, the supine mainstream media have done, having already unforgivably endorsed the Conservatives? I still can't get over the fact that the Harper government got these ringing endorsements from, not from all, of course, across the country. And if things had turned out differently, what would we have done? One of the things I'm working with is the Globe and Mail and the Kudry photograph, the Paris coverage, and looking through a whole series of editorials, opinion pieces, letters, the folio refugee series called Crossings, folio conflict photographers series, and Anthony Feinstein's wonderful commentary on the gaze and its consequences. But inside there are symptoms, too many of them, of neoliberal economies of empathy. So my conclusions from this disjointed, but I hope intermittently interesting and informative talk. What kind of conclusions have I drawn through my struggling to understand this photograph and the multiple forms of disturbance that it induces in me? Whose pain as opposed to whose pleasure? The pain-pleasure distinction plays like tragedy and comedy, and both of those have heavy class, social class implications and can be read in class terms. However, its greater profundity and seriousness continues to tragedy to have a class alliance, not least because social class is still very much with us. The pain of the powerful, one of my conclusions from reading these archives, from going into the coverage in detail and analysis I haven't been able to share with you here, the pain of the powerful fills the screen, the frame, the bandwidth, as it's right within the neoliberal value system. The pain of the powerless gets attention first as the possibility of the optical unconscious or a subtext, less assuredly as affect and its unconscious, and least likely, the pain of the powerless hardly ever features in the media as the political unconscious in full demystification mode and commitment to class struggle and root causes. Remember, root causes were what Stephen Harper and his cabinet had so little interest in. It was committing sociology, if you'll remember that particular phrase. With pain downgraded from political outrage to sentimental projection onto the dead and the precarious living, human interest adorns an economic apparatus that demands and thrives on dehumanizing of the laboring body, gendered, racialized, the laboring body and its dependents. So how can we get, and this is my basic quandary, how do we get from empathy to solidarity? How do we get from sympathy to actual working together in progressive ways for the betterment of our neighborhoods, our communities, our cities, our country? Sharing the pain of the living as well as grief for the needlessly dead is part of this, no doubt. But there are progressive persons and communities that can more effectively share best practices. Standalone insurgencies, the Occupy movement, Maple Spring, Idle No More that began on my campus, Shannon's Way via Alanisa Bomsawin and Cindy Blackstock. You'll have noticed in terms of the children, you'll have noticed that Cindy Blackstock won her case against the government of Canada before the Human Rights Commission. And the government of Canada was seen to be deliberately impoverishing and shortchanging Aboriginal children and the schooling. There's a need for all of these things to come together, but how do we mobilize? How do we move from empathy to solidarity in convergences that are a new intergenerational configuration? Meanwhile, the real crisis is the ongoing biopolitical reach, rapacity, and hegemony of the 1%. Final thoughts on virality. Virality itself is not justice, nor can it work for justice if it excludes bodies in assembly, bodies in occupation, bodies on the march, or the powers of speech and print and broadcast media. Virality has difficult and multiple histories that must be heeded. Virality cannot help defeat neoliberal presentism and amnesia by being presentist and forgetful itself. Virality cannot, as it does with techno-triumphalists, virality cannot welcome in which the web is set us all free, that the web is a priori a profoundly democratizing thing. Well, do a little geography, look around, and you'll find that that is not the case. Virality cannot welcome technology and access uncritically. So that a lot of the tools, a lot of our conventional media, a lot of the lessons we already have learned can play out, can be applied to new platforms of all sorts. And my final slide, speaking about pain, it may pain you to hear this, but the Academy is as much a site of struggle as the society which hosts it. This is a proposition that needs to go viral, not as a form of cyber appeasement or reassuringly futile, predictable whining, but as a call to action, like the one recently issued by the TRC that explicitly and unapologetically challenges the Academy and Canadian society to its core. So I look to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, its report, its calls to action, the model that it has, its stance in relation to the Canadian state. I see that as the most powerful exemplar of the moment, and the concerns that are in there, the models that are used by First Nations, Inuit and Métis people in this country seem to me not the site of deficiency and backwardness, but the form of a future, a generous country, an abundance economy, a sharing, a respectful thing that we need to get to. And when that goes viral, and I'm not holding my breath, if that goes viral, we'll be in a lot better shape than we are just now. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Len, for a complex, challenging talk. We'll have some time. Would anyone like to ask a question of Len, a comment, a clarification, elaboration, whatever? Yes.
I guess just to clarify, thanks. To clarify your conclusion, so are you meaning to say that virality is dangerous as it is now because it simply focuses on a specific situation that usually ignores like the grander scheme of things, and what really needs to go viral is like the historical context of why that situation is even an issue in the first place?
I see the social media as I would like to call it socialist media, but I don't feel entitled to do that because it is a place for the performance of distraction. Not essentially, not always. One can mobilize in all sorts of ways. But the idea is, my claim is that it is the notion of trending is dehistoricizing. It emphasizes the present, and you're constantly checking. So you move from one moment of self-monitoring and sharing, tweeting, etc., to another. So what it does is produce a cyber continuity of going to sites and going and being on listservs and so on. It creates a cyber continuity that is focused on the moment, decontextualizes, dehistoricizes, and tends too often to depoliticize in the name of the political. Therefore, it is not only depoliticizing, but it's often illusory in the kinds of political claims that it makes for itself. So I see this, so the going viral is not necessarily a reassuring indicator of how good people are at their core. The nature of the human is really good. What it does is often simulate agreement, consensus, but it's a form of solidarity that doesn't it doesn't lead to bodies in assembly. It doesn't lead to bodies necessarily on the march. It did with Idle No More, and quite importantly. But it is not in itself a liberating thing. The freedom to click your mouse is perhaps less important than other forms of freedom that create the conditions in which you get access to the mouse in the first instance.
Yes. Here, Angela, bring you the microphone.
Thank you. What I'm thinking about is the fact that the picture of the little boy on the beach has led a lot of people to take a particular kind of action in terms of deciding to sponsor a Syrian refugee family. And I'm thinking that that's a lot more than clicking, but it is also not going to a rally or participating or making some of the kinds of actions that you're talking about. I'd just be interested in you talking about what sort of action or what sort of virality that is.
It's really, I mean, I haven't figured some of this stuff. I'm just kind of exploring it with different languages and lenses. But I would be the last person to disparage the goodness of Canadians. Of giving money, of opening the doors, of bringing the whole discussion around refugees. And the word refugee had vanished almost entirely, as the human rights lawyer Audrey Macklin at U of T has noticed. The word refugee had vanished almost entirely. And the word immigrant had been tied selectively to the word terrorist in terms of Canada's immigration policy. A lot of that turned around because of the timing that Canada's big what if. But when in its turnaround, there was an opening of hearts, there was an opening of wallets, there was a sense that Canada is back. And one of the sunny ways in which Canada was back is that we were returning to a discourse and policy and evidence and demonstration and performance of generosity that reminded us of our own abundance. Our country had been stolen from us and transformed in the name of austerity and in all the things that austerity can forbid. So the return to generous Canada, multilateralist Canada, maybe on the way to Pearsonian Canada, that the return to that was connected to, and it was such a rebranding, and I use that not in a trivializing way, rebranding of the nation and its conversation and its self-understanding, that when that happened, that when you then introduce ideology and political analysis into a moment that is full of feeling good, and people deservedly feeling good about themselves for the things that they've done or are willing to do or will undertake as a result of understanding the predicament in the Middle East. But as for the connections between that massive dislocation of peoples to the petroleum agenda, the configuration of the region in 1919, we should know all of that stuff, right? So that there's a form of depoliticizing squeamishness, it seems to me, about going in and analyzing that particular situation. Ai Weiwei's ironic simulation and the firestorm that it occasions indicates the hazards that attend that territory, that topic, that theme at this moment. So therefore, and I would not dismiss that charity. I would not dismiss the generosity as charity which is salve for the wounds of capitalism. I would not want to reduce human goodness in its collective and individual expressions to that particular box. But why can we not speak about, why is the notion of the political context and implications of what's happening here, why is that not from the start part of the conversation? Why does the affect trump the political unconscious? And so that's how I would react.
Others? No? Yes.
Yeah.
So too.
I'll try to put some of these pieces together. What you've made me think about in your very wonderful talk, and thank you for that.
Thank you.
It seems to me that as you talk about the capitalist economy of sympathy, and what I really liked you talking about the supine media.
Yeah.
There's another element that's very important for us at universities, and that has to do with the cultural capitalist economy of suffering. And so one of the things that I really see in that photograph is the Pietà, and I think that's one of the reasons why it was so compelling.
Mm-hmm.
That image, and you can think about René Girard about sacrifice as the sort of foundations of human thought, connects to another area that I'm very interested in, that is avant-garde art. And so you can think about the performance artists who worked with corpses, or Joel Peter Witkin's photographs or something like that. And that seems to me to be another area that has, or we argue, has this revolutionary potential, open our eyes and so on. And that's what Weiwei is picking into. But it's also an aestheticization of suffering, a solicitation of this economy of sacrifice that's finally very impotent and supine as well. So I was just wondering, what do you think about our responsibility as we politicize not just media but art?
It's a huge question, and the passage from Marx, which pays tribute to the power of the imagination, brings with it, with that power comes huge responsibility. And the transaction between color and black and white, between reality and simulation, the hazardous activation of the iconography antecedent to the image to which you referred, suggests that, first of all, don't get fazed by the likelihood of controversy. It's going to come anyway if you're dealing with anything that is of any importance at all and matters to people. So how do you go into this? Creating the right sort of damage, the right sort of challenge, rather than the inadvertent or incontinent ordinance or collateral damage, which you don't intend to do. And it seems to me that there is no place outside the conflict, because of the multiple layers of meaning, the multiple forms of lens that can be brought to bear on apprehending and interpreting and feeling this image, or the original photograph, or Ai Weiwei. And in that situation, what one needs to do is not to look for a unified single response. Isn't that awful? There's a massively reductive dimension to feel deeply now, and the ways in which the instant canonization of that particular image as an index of human tragedy, blighted life, a life cut off, and so the child becomes a kind of hyper signifier of innocence. And loss. We have to not forget the complexity. We have to infuse or discover the complexity in the image and the history of its reception, its emulation. And so there, I mean, if you think of cultural capital, but also of subcultural capital, this is another dimension of this. And it's very easy to, you should relax. You're not going to get it right. What you're going to do, is this a productive, educative intervention and speech. And you could see how the Wall Street Journal is so symptomatic of setting this up, and here's a photograph from the Depression, here's a photograph from Vietnam, and you can almost select the canon of iconic images that lead you to then say, but many of them at the time were being zealously depoliticized in order to retain or reclaim particular distribution of opportunity and reward. And so this one, I mean, if one thinks of a practice like the exquisite corpse from Surrealists, you get another sense in which the idea of the dead body takes on a huge amount of signification. Interestingly, in Adam Smith, it is living victims. He doesn't feel about sympathizing with the dead. There is a sense of the living victim connected to the anxieties about social stability and economic models that are at the heart, because he's going straight from this to the wealth of nations. And the function of sympathy within that situation, and it's told. He said, no, the spectator at his ease, while the victim is on the rack. Now, the attribution of ease to the human spectator in immediate proximity to the most acute human suffering and torture. I mean, Donald Trump could manage it, I think, and sleep at night, but for most people that would be a horrendous proximity, a deep unsettlement of the position and the languages that you take. So the idea of trivializing by aestheticizing, I am not going to take an a priori essentialist position here. I think art traffics in difficult knowledge all the time. Art attacks. Art is a primordial and a persistent and immensely valuable form of unsettlement, requiring the human sensorium to work if it hasn't been working, requiring it to work in new ways that establish hierarchies between different senses and so on. And it can be, art makes it. It's kind of a battlefield. It's sites of struggle for interpretation, for lucidity, for forms of communicable creativity, and so on. And so the idea that to aestheticize is to trivialize is to refuse one of the most important instruments we have precisely to come to terms with injustice in the world.
I think there was somebody back there, yes.
So in sort of the engagement with social media that you're saying, trending or the like is oriented towards the present.
Yeah.
Are you saying that this is a necessary condition, or that it's just maybe symptomatic of a media in its infancy? Yeah. And is there any sort of, I don't know, new technology, new media that's pushing us towards some sort of more complete, whole understanding of a given trend, if it were, that could move us towards action while still kind of engaging with that media?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you for asking it. My point is that we need every instrument of communications that we can lay our hands on or can invent, but we have to enlist them not in the interests of consumer sovereignty, not in the interests, but in the interests of social progress, of justice, of human rights, of the redistribution of a moral economy across Canada, rather than the accumulation of obscene wealth in very restrained situations. So you would know better than I would how you use your media competencies that are several, no doubt, how you use them to move ahead issues and agendas that matter to you. So your experience of that is what I would like everybody to think about. So rather than saying, if someone has a book in their hands, they're bound to become radicalized and more progressive than someone who has their finger on the mouse. That's not the argument at all. But I think that we need to remember, how can the new media make the archive live? make the past live in ways that can shape the present and actually gesture towards a more desirable future. Now, Idle No More, that was a very interesting case, because the 4 women who used the hashtag for the first time had no clue. So I want to insert hope into the use of new media, but I don't want to have that hope be absolutely delusional. I want it to be the basis on which people can come together in effective ways that produce desirable outcomes. So in that sense, I think and that's why I use the expression techno-triumphalism, because I mean, education. I mean, why do you need universities? You've got Wikipedia. You know, you can burn all the books. We've got Wikipedia now. But where does the content come from? So I think that the subordination of the notion, you shouldn't fetishize the notion of content, because the form, as we've talked about art already, but you don't commodify everything. And so viral marketing, I mean, the idea that WestJet has all its customers spinning things into greater recruitment of customers and so on. The idea, so that the delegation of promotional labor that comes with particular forms of marketing suggests that there is only the commodity. The commodity form is the form that beats artistic form. It beats all other forms. And in that situation, what you have is a kind of economic monoculture, and a monocultural economy will make everything subordinate to it. And it will only permit some things to be said, and others will be prohibited. So yes, social media, but used in the right kind of way, and that's why I think the Idle No More, which is apparently, you know, people like Jeffrey Simpson in the Globe say, well, I didn't know what they wanted anyway, didn't know what the fuss was about, but it's gone away. Hell no, it hasn't gone away, but it's taken other forms, and it can come to life and go back down again. Who are its leaders? Remember that hydra-headed populist that put down in the Shakespeare quote. So what you have here, possibilities, but you've got to infuse them with a sense of context, a sense of ethics, a sense of a political agenda, and then I think change occurs.
An important part of your question, I think, that resonates with Len's talk. You made some reference to, well, this technology in its infancy, and I think, am I incorrect in saying part of what you're saying is that the possibilities are not determined by the technology?
No.
It's how we use the technologies that are the key.
Yeah.
And so much of what you're calling technological triumphalism, and one sees it, my office is in the School of Journalism, the RTA School of Media is all around us. There's a lot of technological triumphalists in this building who see a whole new world being created by the technology, not by the human use of the technology. Yeah. That same technology can be used in all sorts of terrible ways. Yeah. It's not inherent in the technology. Yeah. And then you look at who's dominating the technology and where that's pushing us. I mean, there's a lot of interesting literature being written now about the death of the open web and being replaced by Facebook and the use of apps, and where that's taking us. It's, you know, in the School of Journalism, everyone is bemoaning the demise of the traditional media, because all sorts of journalists are losing their jobs. There isn't the funding for investigative reporting and that sort of thing, and in turn are celebrating, well, all these new media means all of us have access. But in fact, arguably now, there's more corporate control of the new media than there ever was of the old media. If you look at the power Facebook and Google have, it outstrips anything any media corporation ever has had in history. Absolutely. And what you get in your Facebook feeds, what news you get, is all determined by Facebook's algorithm, which is largely secret. Yeah. So it's a question of how we can make use of these technologies, given rather than anything inherent in them.
And a very good example to use is if somebody calls you a Luddite, or if you're tempted to call somebody else a Luddite, it's good to remember the history of the Luddite movement. The Luddites were not opposed to technology as such. They were opposed to the use of technology to further exploit their own labor. That is to say, so it is about the reattachment of any technological innovation to the human enterprise in a broadly understood kind of way. That is, and so focusing on the technology, like focusing on the cyber present within the interactions in social media, I mean, what version of society can we infer from the use of social media? What version of society is being advanced by the use of social media? And when you ask that question, and it's a hard question, I don't have a ready answer to it, but I think that keeping the question alive in that particular form is immensely important to our teaching, to your academic work, and to your work in society. That is, what a paradox that in the name of social media, society would be privatized, internalized, hyper-individualized, fractured, smithereens blown across a world that knows neither history nor geography. So that the social becomes profoundly desocializing. Now, that is a contradiction that I would link to neoliberalism, where the right to consume, in fact, the duty to consume, has ingested all other human impulses and suggests that the triumph of the commodity means the disintegration and disappearance of society and social forms and social movements as we've understood them. And so Jim is right. The radicalism of the menace, the extent of the challenge that is there inside patterns of ownership, at least with press baron. Why were those who owned, what people like Roy Thompson called press barons? Who were the barons? Were they nice guys? Did they treat their underlings well? Did they treat their spouses well? Did they treat their cousins and other families? The notion of the media as a baronial quasi-kingdom has a lot to be said for it, but they were far more accountable to their public in various ways than the people who own the platforms and the technology that you employ when you're communicating with your friends. So that social in social media is a misleading signifier. It needs to be held to account in order to see what kinds of social models and social practice and social agenda this technology can. It's there to serve us. And so just like online teaching, I mean, these massive online classes that were going to be the solution that you'd still have to pay tuition. Why? If everything is online, why do you have to pay for it? Well, of course, they went down the tubes because they couldn't retain students. It was a deep dehumanizing of the relationship between students and their teachers and the material that they engage with, the MOOCs. And what it points to is that the technology, if the technology is claimed as the primary driver and shaper of the agenda, then it's wrong, and it's not only wrong, but it's increasingly menacing and dangerous.
So have you thought?
That's a very gloomy note on which to end, but I'm a kind of gloomy kind of guy, I'm afraid. I'm trying to get my sunny ways going, but Justin's just not getting to me yet.
Any other questions or comments? If not, I hope you'll join me again in thanking Len for a really stimulating talk.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
And thank you for coming.
Thank you for coming.